Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another Evolving HR webinar. We've done one broadly on training before, but that was in terms of leadership training. In this conversation, I want to get stuck into what actually makes great training experiences. And if you saw any of my posts about this webinar in advance, then I know I was being a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but there's an awful lot of death by PowerPoint, really, really dull training out there in the world. And because at Evolving HR, we like to do things differently and we like to showcase the people that are doing things differently, I've invited a panel of people today who work in different areas of the L&D training space, but who each have something fairly unique to bring to the conversation. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, and I shall go around my screen. You don't know which order you're in, but Sheridan, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, yeah, I'm Sheridan Webb. I'm owner of the Training Designers Club, which is the place to go for practical L&D support, especially if you work on your own or you're not an L&D specialist. I've spent many years designing live training events and programs, usually for large businesses. But just before COVID, I decided to take a change to run a community to support people who didn't either want to or have the budget to outsource that design, but just wanted a team in their pocket to help them. And I also sell ready-written training materials. So if it's not your thing, that is a great way to help you out and get you started.
Brilliant. Henry, thank you for joining me. Do you want to go next?
Hey, I'm Henry. I run Udamon, and Udamon's work sits kind of like the messy edge of sort of learning and culture. We help employers move beyond generic training by building co-created, emotionally intelligent, very human-centered learning experiences, and it's especially for early talent who I've been working with for the past 15 years. My experience, particularly with early talent, the real blockers to performance aren't knowledge or skills gaps. They're the unwritten rules, mixed signals, and sort of cultural expectations that no one explains. And this is becoming increasingly problematic for multi-generational teams trying to build trust and momentum fast. So I work with employers like big employers and smaller employers, Skyscanner, Barclays, and then small startups and scale ups, and it's all around surfing these signals and turning those early stages and those intergenerational teams into much more effective and trust-centered communities. And so we build learning that people really trust because they help shape it.
Cool. Toby, we've never met before in the last hour.
Hey, Kirsty, lovely to meet you. Thank you for inviting me along.
It's really nice to meet you at last. I can't believe there's anybody in the world today that doesn't know who you are and what you do, but would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Well, I'll introduce myself with kind of the training lens. So I've
training
been
hat on. Yeah,
I've been in training in L&D for 15 years now. Half of that career was internal in large organizations. The other half of that was external as training and learning, internal comms, transformation providers, all that kind of stuff. And super passionate about applying human-centered design to everything within the world of work, and having applied human-centered design to training and learning experiences, kind of uncovered that when you apply human-centered design to learning and training, you actually end up designing the wrong thing, annoyingly. So, yes, I am a hugely cynical training and learning person. So, that's who I am.
Well, thank you to all of you for joining me. Just going to put a quick poll in the chat there, because I know I made my little sarky comment about PowerPoint at the beginning. So I'm just interested, for those of you that are on the call, interested in how often you do rely on, the basic PowerPoint slide approach. So I've put a little poll there. If you are happy to answer that for me, that would be wonderful. I can see that people are saying hello in the chat as well, which is rather lovely. I love that. Once, twice, three times as Toby. Brilliant. Good on, Samantha. So, okay, let's kick this off. So I guess we're going to start with, this is a huge question. I don't know how we do, but so just, interested in your thoughts. But what do you think actually makes training memorable, and why do so many people get it so wrong? And I'll come to you, Henry, first on that one.
So for me, in my experience, like memorable training isn't really about what's being taught. It's much more about like what's being felt and recognized in that experience for the learners. So, you know, a lot of programs can focus on delivery over sort of emotional salience. So if people don't see themselves in the material, it's just not going to stick or land. And that's a big problem I see, particularly with scaled programs and e-learning programs, is they're far too generic. So yeah, that's my take, is that you need, you know, the experience needs to be centered around that learner's lived problems and aspirations, and how does it help them solve their problems quickly, and then how does it reach their aspirations quickly. If you take those boxes, you know, that's when it becomes memorable, because it's urgent and solves their problems.
Yeah. Toby, what would you add to that?
Well, the thing I said is, like, does training need to be memorable? So, because the only thing that I question there is that training isn't about knowledge retention. I think historically knowledge retention has been the output of trainings. Like, can you remember stuff? Like the education system and all that kind of stuff leads you to be, have I remembered it? So I started deep. I got lost in my own mind about, well, memorable good or memorable bad. So I've delivered plenty of training that's memorable because, I took a KitchenAid food mixer into the back of a Curry's PC World store, into their training room, and we made cakes and mashed potato with the food mixer. Definitely memorable, but did it have any impact? No idea. So I think memorable as an output gets you to a point where you might end up focusing on the wrong things. Unless you are looking at knowledge retention, acquisition and retention, then memorable needs to be baked in. But having looked, I was like, throughout my career, I started in as a training team, and then everyone, ooh, training's a dirty word. Don't use training. It's all L&D and learning. And then we moved away from that. And now I'm back. At square one, going, actually, training is quite important in the right context and delivery. So I was like, why did you ever move away from the word training? So I thought I'd look up the definition. It's the action of teaching a person or an animal a particular skill or type of behavior. And so if the output is skill or behavior, the place I always start with is training the thing you need to affect that change in the first place.
It's a great way of looking at it. I love the way they've got an animal in there as well. I'm not. The added caveat is, I say, also a Pokemon. You train a Pokemon as well, but that might not have ubiquitous kind of landing with my audience here. Sheridan, what are your thoughts on that question about the memorability, and where do people go wrong?
I think, I'm not a million miles away from the two guys here in what they were saying, in that I would say, because I've been doing this even longer than those two guys there, a very long time now. I don't look old enough. You can't apply learning if you don't remember it. So we do have to remember it. Otherwise, how the hell are we going to apply it? Because even if we work out how to do something in a training session, if we then can't replicate it outside that training session, then equally that's been a waste of time. But I think Toby's absolutely right in that it's memorable shouldn't be what we're striving for. It's something, we do need to do things that people will go away and remember and want to do something with. So training that isn't the same as all the other training is going to be better than training that is sit down, shut up, open your books, listen to me type thing. So we do need to do different things. But just going back to, sorry, my menopause brain's just gone. What Henry said.
That's a good point, actually. We haven't got names on the screen.
But yeah, I kicked in there. It is about engaging people at an emotional level. So it's not just about the head. We have to engage the heart as well. And that means making it personal, making it meaningful, getting that emotional connection, meaning that we actually want to do something with it. And that's quite hard when you are delivering an e-learning program to 10,000 people or a certificated syllabus-based program. No matter how good the content is, I question the impact that's going to have.
That's fair. And that kind of speaks to what Henry was saying as well about the whole, the emotional connection, the individuality. Yeah. I think there's a general rule, regardless of the topic that I talk about in these webinars, one size fits all is not true. And you can kind of apply that to absolutely everything across the whole spectrum of subjects that we cover. next question I want to ask, so I mentioned PowerPoint at the beginning, and I did a little poll. I don't know if you've seen the results, but there are 55% of people who've answered have said that they use PowerPoint slides often, but try to keep it visual and short. 33% use them every session. It's the backbone. And then we've got teeny tiny percentages that say, occasionally when there's no better way, or PowerPoint, don't even say the word. I'd be interested in talking to that 5%. So somewhere back in time, somebody decided that PowerPoint was the default for training. And I'm guilty of it. And I'm guilty of boring people by PowerPoint. I remember having to put together things like employment law training. And, I do not have an L&D background. I'm an HR generalist who sometimes got asked to do training. And I know that the people that came to those sessions would have been like, oh, good God, what's the coffee break? Like, make it stop. But Sheridan, I'll stay with you on this one. So where did this whole idea come from that slides were the default? And what would happen if we banned them? What do you think?
Right. Well, I just like to caveat. So for many years, when I used to do more delivery and I focused almost exclusively on design, I went years without using PowerPoint slides at all. And it's very free. And I used to turn up and people go, where's your laptop? So I haven't got a laptop. I've got my session plan and I've got my flip chart pens and I've got my Post-it notes and we are good to go. So that was great because there were less things that could go wrong. And people were engaged straight away. But I think the reason, and it'd be interesting to hear what the guys think on this, why PowerPoint has ended up as sort of the default, is when you ask people, as you said, who aren't L&D specialists, who are subject matter experts to do training, that's what they do. They put all their knowledge into a presentation and think, I'll tell everybody everything I know, and therefore I will have trained them. And nothing could be further from the truth. When I teach people, when I help people with their training design, and sorry, I could talk about this literally for the whole 45 minutes, but I won't. I always say you start with the aim, you start with your why, then you think about, well, what do we need to cover and what are the outcomes? And you write your session plan. For me, the session plan is key. And the PowerPoint, if you're going to use PowerPoint, that should be the very last thing that you create, because nothing wrong with a few PowerPoint slides. They help to keep you on track. They do provide that visual focus for people who are attending the training. So I wouldn't say ban them, that they can be helpful, but please do them last. And I'll cut it there.
I like that. Yeah, there's some conversation in the chat about how it's expected. And I think whether it's because we're short of time, short on knowledge, short on experience, we'll quite often default to what we think is expected, like you just said, because it's like we don't know another way of doing it, so let's just do that.
Yeah, and when I worked for corporates as well, I did a lot of work for corporates, and I will shut up after this.
Okay.
There is that expectation that the value and the content is on a slide. And I mean, I've mentioned I do sell ready-written training materials. You can download all the slides off the website completely free. They're just there. They're freely available, because that isn't where the value is. The value is in how you bring that content to life.
Oh, my God. See, I used to do that. I used to be like, I'll sign up for this, but I'll just get the slides. I'm learning things here. I'm learning things here. Like I say, this is not my comfort zone topic at all. I can't add very much to this discussion. Henry, what are your thoughts around the slides being the default?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I think there are two frames here. Like, the first one is it's sort of expected. So I'll, certainly when I'm delivering training, more conventional training for kind of, say like manager training for Gen Z, people will have an hour to spare and they'll want to come in and get a few frameworks and, get to the point quickly and see things surfaced very kind of concretely, and they want slides. If it was up to me, I wouldn't have them, because slides are sort of often a kind of a crutch for clarity, perceived clarity, not really a catalyst for learning. So, if you take them away, you're going to really see what's alive in the room. And that's really critical. It's a bit of a risk, because if the people who've turned up aren't really up for the training, or it's something they've been asked to attend to for sort of obligatory reasons, what's going to be alive in the room might take a while to warm up, and that might be 45 minutes into your session. So there is a kind of trade-off there. But I would say, to anyone try taking them away and see what you can really build in terms of a dialogue and a kind of co-designed understanding of the people in the room. Again, back to my earlier point, what are their problems? What are they seeing that is working? Because often there's, things that are, happening that need to be surfaced in these sessions, not just, people don't need to be taught at the whole time. And, you'll quickly learn what's being projected and what's actually happening on the ground and what the roots of solutions are. So I would say sometimes they're needed for kind of convenience and clarity and sort of familiarity. But I think the best training sessions really just use them as a bit of a springboard for much deeper, more dialogic discussion.
Yeah. I love that concept you just mentioned of being trained at. Good Lord. I remember doing a 2-day course on organizational design it was a CIPD course. And we were trained at for 2 days straight. And with this enormous, I don't know, over 100-page booklet you used to get like the pictures of all the slides, didn't you, with the notes down the side. And I remember coming away and just feeling utterly drained. And, it wasn't an experience where I felt I particularly learned anything. I could have just gone away and read that like a book later on. Toby, what are your thoughts? I can't imagine. So Toby has a bit of an advantage here in this conversation because I know him quite well. I can't imagine you standing up and delivering death by PowerPoint somehow. I can't imagine any of you doing that, but...
No, and I was quite fortunate early in my career. The first training role I had was product training for Curry's PC World, hence why I mentioned them earlier. And therefore, the company I worked for at the time, Beyond the Box, founded by Christine Knott. It's not a company that exists anymore. She's retired, but was very much get hands-on with the stuff. So we built training rooms for that organization that had washing machines that were plumbed and plugged in, and we flipping used washing machines. We could, if you can, and there were companies that going, this is a washing machine, this is the feature, this is the benefit, yada yada yada. Get hands on washing machines, get hands on a computer, get hands on a smart speaker, figure all this stuff out. And I think that's the premise here, is that the archetypal training is predicated on two things: a PowerPoint deck and a training room. Well, both of those things actually you don't need.
Based learning.
Yeah, like we're all very fortunate enough that we work in the environments that we need to apply our learning. So why are we learning them? Why are we taking you out of the environment you're working in to then be trained and then expecting you to take that back to the environment you work in? Makes very, very little sense. The place where it does make sense, to Henry's point, is there is a lot of conversation that happens in that room. And hand over fist, the training I delivered in my various guises, the two things that people love. They love practical hands-on stuff, and actually I was doing stuff that I can take back, and the opportunity to talk things through and converse with people who are in a similar situation. Yes. Everything else was superfluous bullshit, essentially. There was things on slides, and all that kind of stuff that the people just would glaze over. And they glaze over even more now because we're in the TikTok generation, right? Where you've got the attention span of a minute, not, I tell you what, I'll do 45 minutes of talking and then we'll do an activity for 15 minutes. No, the world doesn't work like that anymore. So I think I then go back to the very best training experiences I've been part of, which haven't been delivered by any training or L&D experts. Stand-up comedy and professional wrestling. Both of those have a very similar framework where they were 8-week programs, and we got together every week for that 8-week program. And at the end of it, we either had to get up on stage and do stand-up comedy, or we had to wrestle another person in front of 300 people, both in front of 300 people. They were delivered by a stand-up comedian and a professional wrestler, and they had 2-hour sessions every week. We had a community of people. We had a WhatsApp group. We had no formal content. We had no PowerPoint deck. Yet they are the most life-affirming, life-changing experiences that I've had, where I have actually exhibited a very tangible change in behavior in an 8-week period. I got through a Titantron, which is where the thing wrestlers come through, in a leotard, and grappled another man in front of 300 people. Ordinarily...
And that's the quote of the session.
Yeah. I didn't do that. I would have never considered doing that. I wouldn't even dream that that was possible. But there was that moment in time where I had to perform to do that. And the same with stand-up comedy. I had to do it. So there was an enormous amount of pressure to actually get that done. And I was supported by some great people. And there was a subject matter expert to help me out, but not an L&D professional or a training professional. So where I ended up was that I started rethinking everything I did like a couple of years ago in 2019, which was like the whole premise of having a training person or a learning function is absolute wacky, because what you're not trying to do is you're not trying to impart knowledge. And knowledge, I'm going to leave to one side, because there is technology and stuff that helps you disseminate knowledge way better than peer-to-peer learning. So we'll move that slightly to the side, because that works. But in terms of behavior change and mindset change, like Netflix documentaries are better at changing my mindset than corporate training programs. You know, Seaspiracy, you know, that completely changed the mindset of a group of people, had a conversation about it, to talk to Henry's point about the emotional connection.
Yeah.
Change the conversation. No organization has delivered anything like that for my money, because they all kind of go, well, the answer to try and get people to change is training. And it could be, and it might help, but it isn't the first place you go to. So when you ask to answer your question, we need to get people to do this. Cool. Sit down at my desk, open PowerPoint. Right. Let's write some training. Let's crack on. The world doesn't work like that, unfortunately. And we don't do it outside the world of work. So why would we do it inside? Baffles me.
That's such a good point. Yeah, it's really interesting. So the question I was going to ask you next was about how we develop training without really taking into consideration that people learn differently. And Henry, I know that you do a lot of work with young adults and early career Gen Z. We're talking about how adults learn, but there are also generational differences as well. You know, everybody who is an adult right now, we've got, there's 4 different generations in work currently. It's like the most we've ever had. We don't take any of that into consideration as well. So I'm really like, what are some of the things that you've found from, you know, the different ways that people learn that you think people could be more aware of and include in their training? And Henry, I'll go to you first on that.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, the kind of whole like learning styles thing's been debunked, right? But I would say, in my experience, it's actually far simpler than people need different types of sort of content and different pace and things like that. Like if go back to my original, like in terms of your first question, like if people see, if it emotionally connects with them, they're locked in. And it's really, you know, is this solving a problem? And the problem with, and do I believe in the person? And I'd say from a generational standpoint, my experience is that older people generally are much more willing to suck up kind of shit content and shit learning, because that's what, you know, that's just, you suck it up and that's what you do. Young people just won't buy into it and will switch off. And then there's the assumption, therefore, that you may have to make learning super quick and gamified and jazzy for young people. And actually, the most powerful learning experiences I've ever delivered or been a part of or seen really connect with young people have been the most simple, organic, kind of analog ones, because they connect with the person in the room. So I often say, you know, there's a bit of a tendency, particularly in AI world and sort of fast moving tech world, to focus a lot on the how and the what, and how can we make that more gamified, more jazzy, more bells and whistles. And actually, if you nail the who, you're pretty much 90% of the way there. So if the person who's delivering the training is someone that the people really connect with and see themselves in and feel is giving a really authentic account or whatever it, you know, talking very broad brushstrokes there.
Is that an emotional intelligence piece, or is that about knowing your audience?
So it's 2 threads. I would say like emotional intelligence is key for that person delivering the learning, perhaps, but sometimes people will accidentally teach other people just by sharing a story. So it's much more, particularly with sort of social media generation, it's much more about authenticity and relatability. So does this feel real? Like people, again, particularly young people, will see right through bullshit and sort of corporate kind of polish, and they'll want to see the kind of real, lived, messy kind of insight that learning is communicating. So, you know, those sorts of things are really key. So I would say it's authenticity, relatability, and relevance. You know, is it authentic? Do I relate to this person? And does it speak to my immediate context? And if you get those things right, it really, really lands.
There's a whole spin-off conversation here about how ready organizations are for that messy authenticity. And that comes up a lot in other areas when we're talking about, it would be lovely if every workplace had psychological safety, but for the reality of people, that ain't ever going to happen. They're never going to feel comfortable being who they really are. And it's like, I don't know, the corporate world in some cases has got a little left behind with some of this stuff, but that's such an interesting perspective.
I mean, and that's the issue, right? Like the corporate world, there are pockets that are not towing this line, but the corporate can sort of slightly stuck in the past in terms of how people communicate with one another. Then there's the social media world, which is basically the world for most people who've grown up in the past 20 years. Yeah. And that is just messy, authentic, story-driven, and completely dedicated around people seeing themselves in the people they want to look up to. And so in the corporate sector, these things don't need to be quite as raw and sort of as off the cuff and as messy as social media, but you can take the principles, and that's what I talk about. I call it expert-free learning. You just take the principles of being authentic, of being relatable, and of speaking in a way that really connects with that person's lived experience. You're taking the essence of kind of the authenticity of social media, and that's more than enough, because that's so absent in so much training these days.
Toby, you've done some stuff around applying sort of social media and influencer principles to the world of work, haven't you? And that kind of ethos.
Yeah, so having worked with an esports team, we've taken an esports content creator who's adept at doing live streams through Twitch and community management through Discord. Primarily, those two platforms, technologically speaking, are pretty much Teams and Slack and Zoom and all those kind of things. They do the same things. So what we do is kind of apply those principles and help leaders become better at using the technology, really, because out of the box, Gen Z comes expecting that approach, but the older generations don't, because they've become entrenched in the systemic approach to learning. The reason why they come to expect it, as Henry said, is because it's just the way it's been done. It's not that they don't necessarily want it any other way. It's the only way they know how. But this goes to I can't remember what you said, Henry. It was the not expert-free learning, but the whatever it was about no person who delivers training is the subject matter expert in what they're delivering generally. So sales training is a classic. I worked with an organization when I was at O2, and they procured a sales training provider. And so all the trainers came. It's like, cool, do you do selling yourself? No. What do you do? Oh, I deliver training. Great. So why the hell should I listen to you about how to do sales? And then I talked to the organization, go, this sales model is pretty cool. Do you guys use it? No, we don't use that sales model. So you're like, okay, so the whole framework of training is like, is predicated on this centralization of stuff. And to Henry's point, you need to decentralize it, because knowledge and influence is decentralized outside the world of work. So you need to decentralize it inside the world of work. And we centralize it. We put an L&D team in there. We put a training manager in there. We put an internal comms manager. We centralize it all to try and make it easier. But actually, you should decentralize it. And one of the biggest crimes is that Meta brought Workplace, the Facebook version, into the world of work, and it never got any traction. Not because the platform was rubbish. Same with Yammer. Not because Yammer's rubbish, because we've lost this ability to really adapt and change the framework inside. Then you can enable peer-to-peer learning, conversation, all that kind of stuff. Because learning is the output. Learning isn't a business function. Training is is maybe the function, right? But you're trying to affect change in mindset and behavior. If you started with that, you wouldn't even have an L&D team, training team to begin with. You'd kind of go, what do I need people to do? How do I figure it out? And you end up with product and service design is really where you get to. And part of the product or service may be training, but it isn't the answer most of the time. But we can do some really cool stuff with it. And I think we probably all three of us here, right? Whilst we might deliver stuff under the guise of training, it ain't training. It's enabling great people to think about things differently and have great conversations about it. And that's all the wrestling and stand-up training did. I had great conversations. I made friends for life. I actioned what I learned straight away. I hurt myself. I laughed at myself. Other people laughed at me. And there were all these mix of emotions that happened by the construct of nothing more than delivering one session every 8 weeks with a moment in time where you have to go away and do something. That's the most thing training doesn't do. It's like, you've done some training, cool, and apply it back in your work whenever you're ready. No person will go back and do that thing unless there's a critical moment where they actually have to do it. So all the training I've had in my professional career, never applied any of it. Never. Yeah. But I've wrestled and I've done stand-up comedy. So whilst people will profess to be experts in training and learning and development, primarily they're not, because actually the world of work, outside the world of work, figured this shit out ages ago. And we're just so far behind. It's like bashing your head against the wall, which is, yeah. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. Sorry.
I was just going to jump in there and say it kind of almost loops back to why PowerPoint. And the thing I see, because I used to design, and I still do a little bit, programs for large organizations. I already said it's not my main job anymore. But the number of people who want to control that content, and it's what you were saying, Toby, isn't it? It's like, it has to be centralized, it has to be signed off, and everybody has to have their input, and it has to be, woe betide if it's not in our corporate typeface. You know, these things don't matter. But it's scary for an organization to say, we trust you to go and learn the things that you need to learn to solve the problems that you have and do your jobs as well as you can. It's a really scary thing because they can't measure it. They can't evaluate it. They can't put it on their LMS. I hate LMSs, by the way. They can't put tick boxes against things. And it's one of the reasons why I run a community now, because all the great stuff happens when great people just get together and have a conversation. Well, we learn so much.
But this is the problem with any training or L&D function. Regardless of how many people or what it is like it completely disregards all the other shit that's going on inside that workplace, and therefore it could be the best memorable PowerPointless free training. But unless the rest of the environment that person's going back to is set up right, it won't have any impact. So when you think about designing training, it's like you can't think about. Someone came to me the other day and went a time management workshop, and I was like, cool, I'll spend half an hour with you to make you realize it isn't what you need at all. Yeah. But it's this broader strategic, systematic change that they need to look at, which the traditional function of HR kind of disables us from doing, because it's like, you're in your box, so you deliver training and L&D. You're in recruitment, so you deliver recruitment over here. You're in internal comms are the worst. Internal comms are in here, and they all deliver stuff to validate their own existence. Whereas if all three of those people talk to each other, you'd probably find, A, you could get rid of a lot of the training you're doing because you fixed it at a system level. And B, you'd probably have less overheads as a HR function because you're not having to spend loads of money on designing all these little tiny solutions that really tie up into a broader employee experience product or service.
We've touched on tech a little bit. Sheridan, do you think that good training can still happen without tech? Should it involve tech?
I'm old school. I grew up at a time when the internet didn't exist. That's how old I am. I was around before PowerPoint. So
so was I. We didn't even have email at my first job.
No. So
overhead projector? Were you using overhead projector?
Absolutely, with your pens.
The PCs that we learned computer studies on at school. They were like the size of a small car nowadays.
Absolutely. So the thing, there's great exhibitions and conferences that people can go to, isn't there? I mean, Learning Tech happened quite recently, but I don't go to that, and sometimes I feel I should, because how can I be a good role model for other people if I'm not keeping up to date with things? But honestly, I just get wound up because they are tech companies trying to persuade the HR or the training budget holder that all you need to do is have this really fancy, always AI enabled way now of delivering content. And that's all they do. They only deliver content. They don't do any of the great things that we're talking about, changing hearts and minds, giving people a chance to practice, holding them accountable to put things into practice. And one of the best programs I ever wrote, it did actually win an award, was where people had specific tasks between the modules and they had to report back on them. They had to actually go and have that difficult conversation. They had to go and implement something and then tell us what they did and what they learned from it, even if it failed.
What was it on? Your award-winning training. Come on, blow your trumpet.
I can't take total credit for it because there was mentoring and coaching in between the modules, which the company did internally. But they had these really specific tasks to do. And I gave them a menu. So it's like, here are 5 tasks related to the things we've talked about. You must do 2 of them, because obviously we wanted it to be relevant to their role and what was happening in their role at the time. So it may have been go and delegate something from your job, have a coaching conversation with somebody. So it was those sorts of things. And then it was just a general management development program, but it's the best one we've ever done. But in terms of tech, I mean, obviously COVID made us all tech savvy. We had to adopt it. And that's when my community suddenly grew, because all these people who've only ever done live facilitation were suddenly thrust into I have to do this virtually. I've got no idea. And that's when I realized it's like, well, it's just the same, except you're doing it on a screen. And that's when I worked out that people were running training just off the top of their head. They had no session plan. They had no instructions. And I thought, how are you doing this? I mean, yes, it's good. Obviously, we need to be able to flex to the people in the room. We need to be able to capture their experience. We need to make it relevant for them. We have to be able to adapt as we go. But crikey me, you've got to have some sort of agenda and some clue as to where you're going, because you need to know why you're delivering that training. What is the outcome? What is the behavior change? So you can't just turn up and say, right, guys, what we're going to cover today. So is tech essential? Absolutely not. Tech gives us more options, which is brilliant. But what I do see, and I get a little bit frustrated with, and I'm sure the guys have got much more experience on this, is when people fall in love with a piece of kit or a platform and then they try and make everything fit it. It's that whole, if all you've got is a hammer, everything you see is a nail. And that's what frustrates me, when people have spent, £250,000 on an LMS and probably more. And they say, well, can we train the trainer on it? Or can we do coaching skills? Like, no, you really can't. Yeah.
I just put a comment in the chat because it's come from all 3 of you, but I'm just loving the passion that you all have for these topics.
It's L&D folk. It's how we are.
Fire coming out today. I love it. Henry, where do you stand on the tech piece? Do you agree with Sheridan, or do you?
So I agree, but I agree and disagree at the same time. So I'd say, for me, tech is the frame, not the picture. So yes, great learning can happen without it. Absolutely. That's how I learned skills on my motorcycle. There's no tech involved in that apart from the engine and the machine I'm on. But actually, more often than not, tech can extend, it can amplify, and embed learning really efficiently and effectively. And this is the key clincher, and this is where most of these big tech platforms I have similarly negative views on to Sheridan, if it's rooted in human experience. So that, lots of stuff that I do is tech driven. We create simulations, we have content, we have an e-learning kind of approach, but it's rooted in a co-design process that puts the people who are going to be learning through that technology at the center of the design process. So they're not left out, and it's not just sort of generic one size fits all. So yeah, for me, tech is the frame, not the picture. And often that's what people get wrong, is they think tech is the picture. And that's where lots of things can fall down. So we have to put the humans that it's sort of intended for right at the center of its use. Otherwise, it's just efficiency, sort of way over kind of effectiveness. And in fact, it's efficiency and no effectiveness often.
I've loved, this is fairly basic from a tech perspective, which will come as no surprise to Toby when me talking about basic tech. But I've loved some of the tools that are out there in terms of making sessions interactive, particularly if they're online sessions. But as somebody who's, always been very introverted and wouldn't want to ask a question in a room of people, having things like Slido or just being able to do polls and creating word clouds with people's thoughts and all of that anonymized stuff, that's given everybody an opportunity to interact and put their 4 penneth in. Plus, we've all been in training sessions in the past where there's one person who puts their hand up for every question and dominates the conversation. It's never been me. It's, they've never got to me because I'm the quiet one in the corner doodling. But so for me, having, that sort of interactive tech helps to make you feel part of the session that's going on without having to put yourself in a position where you're uncomfortable.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like it needs to facilitate your learning, as in you, as in the people in the room, or that it's intended for, not just project content at you, which is where it gets misused. So completely, and particularly with the young early talent as well, who different people have different, and kind of the work I do around surfacing these kind of unwritten rules, getting people thinking about how to approach a challenging conversation or whatever. That's very hard to do through a kind of instructional environment. Actually, if you can do it through an interactive experience that's technology driven, I have time and space to go through it with no exposure to anyone else, and I can understand and learn the insight at my own pace without feeling like I'm being exposed for not quite understanding something. So there's huge advantages to that, definitely.
Toby, thoughts on tech?
How long you got? So
20 minutes and several more questions.
Okay, so I'll try and the first point is about the online facilitation, right? So having worked with content creators who live stream for hours on end and have to engage an audience and get them to converse, that is a way different skill set than delivering online training. So Chris O'Gara, the Gara Show on YouTube, a few people on the call might have been on the training course with him as well, delivers sessions completely differently to how I've ever seen them. And I've had to push myself and stretch myself to engage an audience virtually like he does, because he does it like nobody I've ever seen before. And it's incredible. And he does it without a deck and a session plan, actually. So no, that's not true. He has a little bit of an idea. I gave him a session plan and he kind of threw it out the window and, yeah, I get it. That's fine. I can deliver a session on this. But the way he engages that conversation to create community and conversation and engagement, as you said, Kirsty, with the interactivity, is off the hook. It's incredible. And the thing I really love about it is it's rooted in a really human experience. It's delivered through technology, but it's rooted in a human experience. And he's absolutely fantastic.
What's his name, Toby? If I can find a link to his YouTube, I'll put it.
I'll get it while we're talking. Yeah. So you won't, you have to go in and watch him live. That's the thing. But trying to take some of those skills of how a streamer engages loads of people and gets them to converse. He gets people to converse online way more than anybody I've ever seen. Full stop. That skill set. And it's a skill. And I struggle. I have someone who's facilitated learning and training for a large amount of time. But that was the first time I went, shit, I don't know how to deliver online training like this guy. He delivers it the best. But to answer your question, Sheridan, you mentioned HR and learning technologies. What a load of old garbage that place is. And I can say that because this is behind closed walls. But oh my God, what a diatribe of just absolute nothingness. Primarily focuses to the two previous
Why don't you say what you really think?
Yeah, sorry.
I'm really glad now that I didn't fork out for a train ticket to go all the way down to London.
There's loads of people there that I know. So I spent my day in Costa. It was just convenient. I got 20 meetings in 2 days when it would have taken me a lot longer to do, and it was in person, so it was nicer. And the weather was good, actually, and there was a nice green van parked outside. They were the highlights. So a lot of that stuff talks about content creation and content delivery, I think, is where we go down to. So content delivery, TikTok, Netflix, whatever, consumer-grade content delivery is incredible. No organization, no piece of workplace technology is ever going to meet that, because Netflix, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok have had 10, 15, 20 years of developing a product which engages people with content. So why you'd ever waste your time looking at, how do we do this at work? Don't even bother, because you're going to spend the next 15 years catching up. Even LinkedIn, right, as a work-based platform, has really got this issue with itself, trying to figure out how do we deliver video content in the best way, when it's really? You're still trying to figure out how to do video content in the best way? Everyone else has figured that out. LinkedIn, get with the program. Now, that might be a generational thing. I do appreciate that to some of the things we've talked about. So we talk about content creation. Are you delivering to Henry's point, are you delivering the right content in the first place? Does it win hearts and minds? You're never going to match the budget of what Netflix have to create documentaries and films that change the way people think. So why are you even trying to make video content? Don't use Synthesesia or stuff like that to try and cheap video content. It doesn't work like that. So what can you do? You can use the human. Humans love talking to humans, and content creators can create content very quickly and easily with very little production value and budget and still affect a change in mindset. Goes back to the esports content creator, right? That's what he does. He gets people to shift their mindset and their behavior through what he does from his bedroom. So he's not doing that. Now, this is where HR and Learning Technologies is a kicker. One of their primary partners is a piece of technology called StoryTagger. And I've wanted to say this for a while, but I don't do it in a public forum because I'll never get invited back to Learning Technologies. But StoryTagger is ridiculous. It is an app that helps people create user-generated content to put it on their work platforms. If you gave that to a YouTuber or a TikToker, they would laugh in your face, because that is not the way you create content for your audience. To this kind of formulaic approach, like film a 10-second scene saying who you are, film a 10-second scene about where you work, and then it automatically stitches the content together. That's laughable. That's augmenting really poor human behavior and adaptability in trying to retrofit it in. So from a content creation perspective, Gen Z are going to enter the workforce and absolutely blow everyone else out of the water in terms of leadership, because they can create content, they can create online sessions way better than anyone in over their 30s. The only struggle is, will they engage people over their 30s? That's the issue, right? That is the issue, because those people over the 30s love the in-person stuff, and these person coming in love the digital stuff. So there is this mismatch. We have to be able to do both. And so these two generations have got to talk to each other. That's the big conflict in work at the moment. So technology is a great enabler, and it will enable the democratization of knowledge as well. And that's the key thing that AI is bringing. All this other stuff is you can democratize knowledge. A lawyer in 10 years will not have to go and study loads of case law, because you just go, oh, case law, I need some case law on this. There's your case law. What's my skill? Storytelling, of being able to convince an audience, being able to communicate effectively. That's the human skill that replaces. And all of a sudden, what you now need to train people in is, how do you be a person? And you can't do that by sitting in a classroom talking about it. You've got to get out there and do it.
Is it, you've segued into my next question again rather nicely there, and the storytelling's come up a few times over the course of this conversation. Henry, what do you think? I mean, you talked about this initially. What do you think the role of storytelling is in great training? Like, what kind of an impact can that have?
Yeah, so I mean, my perspective that it's not the sort of cherry on the top or something you could have in your kind of toolkit. It is like, it's the delivery system for truth. And that's why social media is so popular. Everyone can be very critical of social media, but basically it's amplifying and catalyzing a very ancient and timeless form of human communication, which is sharing stories, right? And in a learning context, it's basically with young people particularly, and with older generations, but again, like I said earlier, older generations will sort of suck up something that doesn't work so well. The young people won't, and the thing that everyone needs and will respond to, if you give it to them, is a good story. And that it can be a Trojan horse for really difficult ideas, which is really powerful. And critically, particularly speaking to your point earlier about not feeling like you're being taught at, it lets people feel something without being told what to feel. And if you can achieve that, you've really landed some really effective training. So yeah, story, yeah, it's huge. And that's when final point, like when I was talking earlier about people focus a lot on the how and the what. It's the gamification, it's the content jazzy LMS thing that's got some new kind of AI copilot, joblet, whatever. Like, no one just means nothing versus a human story that people can connect with. And that side of things will be the future of learning. And so for me, it's very much not the how or the what, it's the who, and the who is all centered around that story that people connect with.
Just out of interest to those of you listening, just pop in the chat whether do you actually use storytelling in learning content that you have in your organizations, or do you use it in any capacity in the work that you do in your organization? Because I know there's I've got a friend that I always stay with when I go to London. She's a head of marketing and communications for an organization, and they have this push across the whole organization to use storytelling more and more in their comms, in their promotion, in everything, because it's like Henry says, it's like you're giving people like a human connection, actually generating emotion in people and empathy and that kind of thing. It makes it's so much more real. And I think of some of the talks that I listened to at the Big Meet on Friday, there was such an enormously personal element to some of what those people were talking about, that the message they're trying to convey overall comes through so much more strongly because they're using, personal experiences and storytelling. Sheridan, what are your thoughts around the power of storytelling? Oh, you've gone mute.
Sorry, that was my fault.
That's okay.
I echo what Henry was saying, really. I think the stories really give us that emotional connection. What I have found is that people don't remember a bulleted PowerPoint list. They just don't. I think everybody who designs training should know about MASTER, which is an acronym devised by Colin Rose, which stands for Mindset, Acquire Information, Sift for Meaning, Trigger the Memory, Exhibit the Learning, and Reflect. And we've got loads of stuff like that on my website. And what stories really allow us to do is allows us to get all of those things in one go. And that's an accelerated learning technique, because we need to feel inspired, and people are increasingly inspired. I don't know about you, but when I see people on LinkedIn saying, hey, I now earn 6 figures a month, and look at me on my yacht with my Porsche, and 3 years ago I was living in my car. That doesn't.
Oh, I should stop.
I've stopped following Kirsty now. It's really annoying.
But those people, I don't want to engage with those people. We like to engage with people who we relate to, who are 2 or 3 steps ahead of us, and we think, if they can do it, I can do it. Because as you said before, it's not just about what we need to do. It's having that belief, it's having that mindset, it's being inspired. And again, it just comes down to that human connection. And again, one of the best programs I ever wrote was based around an extended case study, which is a story, right? And it was basically a soap opera. So I introduced these characters in the first module because we were looking at finances. So we introduced all the characters, and then we focused on finances. And then I just kept dropping in more about their lives and how they were. And by the 3rd module, people were turning up to the training going, oh, I do hope John's all right after what happened last time. They thought
that was fun to put together.
It was brilliant. I love writing case studies. It's one of my favourite things. So, yeah, stories. And I think because we often think that I don't have any amazing stories to tell. I was at your conference in November listing all these people with incredible stories on the stage. I thought, I have had the world's most boring life. I do not have a story to tell. But I tell you one thing, people in the room or online have got stories to tell, and they love to tell them. So all you need is to know what sort of story you want to pull out and what sort of learning you want to get from that. And that just makes the learning personal. It makes it more relevant. It makes it more powerful. And you just can keep going back to it. So stories, don't think because you haven't got a great story or it's not you going to be delivering the training, doesn't mean to say that you can't include them. They're a very powerful learning mechanism.
Yeah, absolutely. Toby, fan of storytelling? Not a fan of storytelling?
Oh yeah, stories. I agree with everything that Henry and Sheridan said. Is that it is incredibly important. It's the foundation of human interaction. Really, that's how you get shit done. Stand-up comedians, wrestlers, they're both storytellers. It's exactly the same thing. So the thing it's important to do is learn from other people and other avenues that tell stories. Again, as a training or L&D or HR professional, wouldn't say they're the 3 people I'd go to learn about storytelling, to be completely honest. I would go to wrestling or stand-up comedians, or as I did for 2 years, I worked for a media production company that made films, that told stories through filmmaking. And it was one of the most stressful 2 years of my life. But I knew in my back pocket, I had 3. Can you still hear me? My headphones have just gone off. I had in my back pocket 3 things. I had a 2-minute film that could make people cry. And it would make them think differently about how you answer a phone in a contact center. It would do those two things. Hand over fist, I would wheel that video out every single time. 2 minutes is all it took. It didn't take an hour training session.
Do you still have it, and can you share a link?
No, it's
copyrighted.
It is. So what it does is it features a real call from a contact center for a bank, and it's essentially this guy who's just come out of hospital. It's really hard to talk about it, but I won't look at you, Kirsty. No. It's important because essentially he just come out of hospital and had severe thinking difficulty. He had surgery on his brain, and so he's like, he couldn't remember his PIN number, didn't know his account number, and this call was handled in the computer says no kind of way. It's like, I just need you. Can you give me your first line address? Oh, I can't remember. And we took this call and kind of had these flares of like the memories of this guy and this actor kind of pretending to be sat at home, absolutely distraught he couldn't do this. And it goes, well, if you can't give me the first line address, I'm going to have to end the call now. Okay, and boom. The phone gets hung up. That is 2 minutes. And we just created visuals for a call that existed. And ever since I have gone, I will never pick up a phone if I'm in a contact center and act in the way that happened on the call. I will not do it because that made me cry and it made me think. There's another one, less severe, but it was about what do you say and do in public spaces and where does that data go? And it was like, shit, I used to say stuff all the time out in open spaces and people could hear it. And I was like, I didn't even consider it. But the 2 minute film made me change my kind of feeling. So, but the problem is if you take story, if you start with training, right, is like no training session I've ever delivered has been 2 minutes for a kickoff. So you're like, okay, how would I do that in an hour online? It's like, well, you could do it in 2 minutes over a film if you wanted. So I think it's really, really important. And sometimes is the only thing you need to do. You don't even need to train. It's just like, I think we were on a call this morning, right? It's like, if you wanted to really get people in your organization to think differently about gender equality, get them all a cinema ticket to watch Barbie and get them in the pub to have a 2-hour conversation about it afterwards. That'll start things changing and people thinking differently. And all of a sudden, all it's cost me is a trip to the cinema and a couple of drinks in the pub, and then figuring out what people talked about, where are really the issues in this organization. But to Henry and Sheridan's point, right, it's about how do you enable that conversation? If you can start that with storytelling to then enable conversation, it's kind of all you need to do. Get rid of that PowerPoint. Don't talk about it. And there's a whole host of other things to talk about.
It's powerful. It's funny, as you're talking, I said at the beginning, I'm not an L&D professional at all, but I do actually have a program that I developed about helping HR professionals become more strategic. And as I'm listening to you, I'm like, oh my God, the whole thing is storytelling. It's all the things that I screwed up in my own HR career, with like some pretty gnarly examples of where, I really messed that up. And now I've flipped it around and I'm teaching people don't do it the way I did it. So I realized that is, I've brought that storytelling from a personal experience into the entire program without actually labeling it as that until I spoke to you today. So that was quite a revelation for me there.
What I would just implore everyone to do after this webinar is I'm going to just post a 5-minute video in chat. Just watch that. That's how you try and train people on fire safety.
Okay, this is how because I've seen, we used to have some of the old harassment videos were hilarious back in the day, like really bad acting and people going up and sort of pinching someone's bottom and then going at the camera. They were had big 80s perms and things. They were marvelous. Is this the right way of doing?
No. This is a humorous clip from The Office, and but just look at what he's doing and what he's trying to achieve, and actually imagine if you designed fire safety training with even just a little bit of that. Someone I used to work with flooded their head office with counter-terrorism police, pretending that there was a terrorism event happening in that office, and they did it to see how everyone would react. That was the counter-terrorism training. Yeah. I think you've both mentioned simulations, right? It's like, why take you out of the environment and out of that place to train you on something when we have... The shop floor training in Curry's PC was great. Okay, so you sell on the shop floor. What we're going to do is going to put you in a training room and teach you how to sell. It was like, yeah, but I do all my selling out there, and you've got all the stuff and tools that I used to sell out there. Why are we not doing it out there?
And I think that's... Sorry, I was going to say... I think that's
in London. My husband volunteered for the Met, and he used to go be an actor in a lot of the simulations that they do for police officers, but they weren't always, in remote, waste grounds somewhere. They did one at King's Cross, while there are people getting off trains, just coming and going, And the public had no idea that this was a police training exercise. And my husband had to pretend to be a drunken, belligerent man. And I don't think he found it very difficult. Very funny. But no, it's like, I love that idea of doing it just like slap bang in the middle of King's Cross while there's people coming going thinking, what the heck is going on over there? But there are police officers having to do it in a, you have members of the public coming up and going, is everything okay? And the police officers that were being trained also had to then deal with real members of the public as well as the actors that they were dealing with, which is pretty cool. My gosh, sorry.
I think that's, I know we're very short on time, but I think that's why sort of the whole structured training session doesn't usually work for experienced people. If you've never done anything before, if this is completely brand new to you, then going through a step-by-step process is helpful. But when you're bringing experience to a role, and what you were saying about stories, people probably know a lot of it. They just haven't put it together in the right way, or it's at the back of their mind, or they're just missing one piece. So when we draw their own experience out and share ours, that's when you see people going, oh,
yeah,
because they had 90% of it. They were just missing a piece and it wasn't put together. So stories, real life training.
That made it more real. Yeah. That's a good note to finish on. Thank you, all of you. This is literally what I say at the end of every single one of these sessions. I could have carried on for another 2 hours. I genuinely really enjoy these conversations. There's been an awful lot of passion and enthusiasm here from you all today, which is wonderful. For those of you listening, this has been recorded, and the recording will be shared with everybody who registered. So that also applies to those that weren't able to make it today. But yeah, thank you to my panel for joining me. This was really, really interesting. And hope to see you at another webinar soon. Our next one is around training career development for experienced HR professionals, and that's going to be on the 28th of May. So thank you to Toby, Henry and Sheridan.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Talk to you soon.